Welcome back to another episode of MedTech Trends, everyone. I'm your host, Dorian. So today we are joined by Ann Barnes, who is the CEO of IMO, Intelligent Medical Objects. We're going to refer to it as IMO for this conversation. Now, Ann Barnes joined IMO in 2018 as the CEO, of course. She is leading the company's day-to-day operations. She also brings with her well over 13 years of experience in both the software and the services side of healthcare, which of course makes her an excellent resource to talk about the importance of standardizing data and the needs that meets for both patients and physicians. Prior to IMO, she joined MedData as Vice President of Client Services and rose quickly to the position of Chief Operating Officer. And in 2013, she was promoted to President and soon after to CEO. Now, IMO is a privately held company. It specializes in developing, managing, and licensing medical vocabularies. It's used by 4,500 hospitals and about 500,000 physicians daily. Really impressive stuff. IMO partners with various healthcare organizations, medical content providers, and EHR developers. It was founded in '94. There's quite a bit of history there, so we'll definitely dive into that a little bit today. And it is based in Rosemont, Illinois. Welcome, and really glad to have you on the call today with us. I'm super excited to get into this conversation about IMO and everything that the company has to offer.
Thank you for having me. I love being here.
To start off, so we have quite a few things that I wanted to dive into today. And one of those, of course, is the company culture itself, which I know that there's been a lot of focus on, and you've talked about it in quite a few other media outlets and articles as well. It's very evident, and I think that's a very, very important thing, especially in today's day and age. And at the same time, the company's services are extremely fascinating because on the one hand, I think, it's sort of operating behind the scenes in terms of the core offerings. But on the other hand, the other way to look at that, I think, is that it offers a very foundational service that so many healthcare providers, organizations, companies, and so on actually depend on every single day. And the company's, of course, been around since the mid-90s. And I wonder now, I wonder if we can start off with the company history, how it's sort of grown since founding. And I know that was well before your time with the company, but I wonder if you could take us through that. The technology landscape has evolved. The company's offerings have also evolved over time. Can you give us a bit of a synopsis on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the company was founded by Frank and Nimrod, as you said, in 1994 and went through just a ton of evolution over time. But what didn't change was the actual focus of the company, which was how do we actually make healthcare better by helping the physician side of that equation? How do we make all of this transition to systems and documentation easier on the physician and get them back to doing what they trained to do, which is to really take care of their patients? And the company philosophy from the get-go was you can't do that unless you have a large clinical staff working for you. Physicians think like physicians. We can't think for physicians. And so from a very early stage of the company, we had a very large group of both practicing physicians, clinical informaticists, RNs working side by side with our product development team so that the products that were developed were really what physicians needed to see. And that theme has continued, certainly has expanded well beyond just the individual hospitals, but really thinking about what now today is needed in healthcare data overall. Part of it is making sure the data is standardized and we have a common terminology, which I think we've done a really good job of getting out there. But now it's moving more into how do we actually mine that data for the specificity that we need for the different use cases that are happening all around the globe for people to provide better patient outcomes, better patient access, and a better understanding of what's going on across a health system versus system by system.
And you mentioned a couple of things that I wanted to dive into a little bit more there. So one of these is just the sheer scale of what we're talking about here, and again, this kind of backs up why this is so important. So I'm taking these stats from the IMO website. Of course, there's a lot more detailed information, but essentially, we're talking about 2.4 million terms across 24 different coding systems. And again, used by 500,000 physicians daily. These coding systems are actually very widespread. There are a number of case studies, of course, that are on the IMO website. We'll see if we can include a link in the description for this recording. But these are daily use terminologies, and there's a vast array of these things. And of course, they evolve over time, 20 to 24 different coding systems. Some of them are very niche, specialized terms. Some get sort of built on or added on over time. I wonder if we can talk a little bit about, why it is that these things have grown over time and why there are so many, and maybe a couple of the applications specifically as well.
Sure. I mean, I think if you think about it really simply, clinician-friendly terms really means that a clinician can go in and search or document in their own language. It could be abbreviated, just like you can do a Google search today, right? On a topic on the internet. They can write it however they want to write it, because we thought it was really, really important to help physicians as they document get all of their thoughts out without worrying about the downstream use case. They don't need to worry about, is this going to be used in quality reporting? Is it being used for billing? Is it being used in patient reporting? Doesn't matter. Just allow them to document however they want to document. And that 2.4 million is 2.8 million today and continues to change every single day. It is not a stagnant number, partially driven by physicians themselves. So we have input from all of these physicians that are using our system daily. They send us requests for terms. And when we see something happen thematically, we flag that and add the terminology. But we also work side by side with the CDC. So this last year could not have been a bigger example of that. We started in January adding new descriptors to our system early on in COVID. And then, of course, as we all know, we learned more and that changed constantly. And so we worked every month with the CDC to continue to add descriptors and to continue to add more information as codes were being added, primarily in that application, if you think about it, so that physicians could differentiate between flu symptoms and some of the symptoms they were seeing for COVID, because in a normal system without those descriptors, everything looked the same. And so we wanted to, as we learned more about these systems and more about treatments, add more and more descriptors. Some came directly from the CDC, some came directly from our physicians. And so in a year where we would normally do 6 releases of our software, we did 12 because it's constantly changing. And that's part of the complexity here, is that it's never stagnant. If you just took a download of all of our terminology in January of this year, it's changing, it's fluid, it changes all the time. So it's really important to keep up to date. It's one of the services we provide, because so many of the hospitals and physicians don't need to spend time worrying about that. And we're embedded right in the systems that they use. So whether they're working with a large EHR or a small EHR, we're going to be right embedded in their workflow. It's not something separate that they're going to or having to worry about.
I'm actually very fascinated by this. It might not be the case for everybody, but I have a data science background. I've worked with a lot of these coding sets. I've also designed studies. Real world evidence studies is a major thing in healthcare now. Payers, of course, looking for this information. Providers are looking for it to build efficiencies. And so to me, the value of these value sets is pretty obvious. That might not be the case for everybody. But I think the example of the COVID-19 value set that was created by IMO quite rapidly at the start of, and I think this was January 2020. So it's almost like as soon as the COVID-19 was starting to spread in the news, IMO was right on top of it, building a value set specifically for this, for the pandemic. And I believe it also offered it, or at least a version of it was offered to the general public. It was for free, because I went on the website and I downloaded it and I looked through it. So extremely valuable. This is actually such an important case study, again, of how to actually make use of these value sets. Maybe also kind of building on this example, I wonder, how were providers or the partners that IMO services, what were they looking for, and what was really driving the evolution of the COVID-19 value set itself? Were they using it to begin with to learn about the disease? And I imagine today might also be used to do things like study it from new cases coming through the pipeline, and also potentially to help deliver the vaccine through distribution channels. So a lot of applications.
Definitely understand this. So a little complex of a question. Let me break it down in a couple of ways. One is what we were just talking about is the terminology, and now we've moved into value sets. And value sets are really part of our evolution as a company into insights. And what does that mean? When you're taking terminology and you're translating it to this 24 global code sets, those code sets are very, very important, but they're built for very specific reasons. Some are billing code sets, some are reporting code sets, some are quality reporting code sets. So they are organizing data in a way that works for that use case. Unfortunately, those code sets are not the best places to go to actually pull very, very specific groups of patients or cohorts of patients, because they don't go down to that level of specificity because it's been summarized into a code set. So what value sets or IMO precision sets do is allow the provider, the hospital, the customer, the data aggregator, whoever that might be, reach into that vat of data in a very, very, very specific way and pull the very specific group that they want to look at. And that was critical with COVID. So in the beginning, it was critical because they wanted to be able to see who their symptomatic patients were and how that looked across disparate systems. So across an entire health system where it might be an ambulatory system plus 2 or 3 large EHRs, plus some behavioral health, and it could be all different types of specialties. And they needed to be able to pull all of that together and say, what are the instances we're seeing right now of COVID symptomatic patients? It started pretty simple. It actually got much more advanced as time went on because they wanted to start looking at very specific categories of patients with underlying conditions or combinations of underlying conditions and COVID symptoms and or COVID positive tests. And so it was really providing the entire industry the ability to reach into that big vat of rich data and pull out that specific group the way they needed it and when they needed it. And remember, we're updating all of the terminology and the descriptors every month so that group remains sort of up to date, maintained, and real time with all of the information as the information changes. So it was a service we provided out free to our customers, and we did open source some of it because we thought it was the right thing to do in such a critical time, and we had the ability to do it. But the insight products become more and more critical as people are looking at both the normalization of data so that the data quality improves, and then the ability to get the data the way you need it. We call it fit for purpose, right? Pulling the data the way you need it for the purpose that you need it for.
There are a lot of different ways to kind of take this. The value sets themselves are, I imagine, I almost want to paint a picture of it. So imagine you have all this information gathered from millions of patients, all entered into EMR vendors. EMR vendors, sometimes they'll have their own kind of systems, but they're not necessarily optimized or specialized to actually take advantage of these codes. So you're gathering all this data from all these patients through these EMR platforms, and this is the key, is that they've not been standardized. And to your point, the goal here is to be able to say that we have a set number of diagnosis codes that are these are the ones that we look at, and then we can segment patients if we need to understand a certain patient population that way. There are also billing codes, there are lab codes, and so on and so forth. And so there's a lot of richness, I think, in that information that's extremely valuable in and of itself. Have you guys started to think about how to, aside from providing the service of being able to standardize codes so that they're really consistent and actually usable from all this vastness of the data that exists out there, but also how to actually mine that information in terms of an analytics platform or with a certain application in mind, like, real world evidence, cohort creations, or data sets or studies?
Yep. So all good questions and good thinking on that. So, first of all, what is happening in the industry right now is there's a much stronger focus on data quality. I think in the past, we've all been focused on better ways to mine the data, kind of skipping the how do we get the data quality up so that mining it makes a lot of sense. And that starts with data normalization. And so what we launched last year was a product called IMO Precision Normalized that allows a health system, a data aggregator, a health company, anybody who has a large amount of patient data, some which may have IMO embedded in it, some which does not have IMO embedded in it. But we're able to actually standardize and normalize that data to a much deeper, more granular level than just at the code level. We can take it all the way back down to our very, very specific terminology, so we can get to that level of specificity. Once it's normalized, then we have a series of products called IMO precision sets that go after a variety of different sort of categories of cohorts that you want to create, and go in and mine that data and pull out their very specific cohort. What we're moving towards and haven't launched yet is a tool that allows somebody to do that on the fly, to create any cohort they want on the fly and pull that data set as they need it, with us always maintaining and updating in the background.
Mm-hmm. And would this be for big healthcare organizations, or could private practice, small clinics and practices, would they be able to use it too?
Everybody uses it. You know, we obviously started in the acute care hospital space, and small hospitals, large hospitals, huge health systems are using these tools. But we're also being used heavily in the ambulatory space, and they're using that. And we ventured out into what I call the rest of that provider ecosystem, which is everybody else who consumes that data. Could be a patient education company, could be a care management company, could be a data aggregator, an HIE. All of those are different use cases to mine the data, right? They're all trying to do something slightly different, but it starts with that standardization of the data. And so there's application really all over.
I like that point that you mentioned. It's not just about mining data, but actually making use of it. So mining accurate data and data that's actually been validated and that sort of thing. So that's the only way to actually make use of these vast swaths of data that we now have, which a lot of companies are actually using, and I think rightly so, to improve services, to better tailor services to particular patients, and to just make the system a lot more efficient and effective at the same time too. In terms of the customers at IMO, do any particular stories come to mind? Maybe a recent customer that's been able to make use of it. Let's go a little bit past just the COVID-19 example, because obviously a lot of people have really needed that. But any particular stories come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, I have stories for days, but I'll give you a couple different types of stories, because I think these really matter. In just staying on theme, what we were just talking about, we have started to partner and sell to large data aggregators in the healthcare space. And last year we implemented in a very large data aggregator who takes in massive patient data from patient registries for a variety of use cases, sometimes to help pharma with better clinical trial targeting, sometimes for outcome sort of proactive work that entities are doing. And we implemented both IMO Precision Normalized to help standardize the data first. And then we did IMO Precision Sets with them. And what they found was their hit rate was over 30% higher in actually identifying patients in multiple areas. 30% was sort of the base, sometimes higher, than they were finding before when they looked for a data registry, when they looked for clinical trials. So just an enormous impact. We believed lots of that to be true in our own testing, but it was nice to have a customer have that huge impact right away out of the chutes. And they continue to be big users of the product. That's sort of in the data aggregation world. In the provider world, we get input from providers every day. I remember my 2 HIMSS ago, when we did HIMSS in person back then, I had providers stopping by the booth all the time saying, this is really a game changer. And I'm not exactly sure where you start and stop and where the EHR starts and stops, but it doesn't matter, because this is allowing me to look back up at my patient and actually do what I need to do and not worry about the rest of it. Documentation was a huge headache, and it was really, really grinding me down. I'm actually seeing more patients now, and I'm engaging better with my patients, which is what we really want to hear. And then we also have a product called PeriOp, which really focuses on the perioperative dictionaries and the workflow there. Not to get too overly complicated there, but that product has been a very big growth product for us. And the reason is because it's simplifying the process and standardizing the dictionaries and terminologies, and it has impacts on just the workflow, of course. It has impacts on better pre-authorization and quicker pre-authorization, more accurate pre-authorization. It has better OR utilization because they're able to manage things all the way through pre-auth so that things aren't being rescheduled in the surgical suite. And so we're getting lots of amazing stories about that. And that, coupled with this post-pandemic phase we're entering in, where elective surgeries are coming back and surgical revenue is so critical to our hospitals, it's really meeting up with the need at such a good time. So we have lots of good stories, lots of good customers using this. I could probably talk to you about stories for days, but those are 3 different sort of varied examples of the application.
Awesome. Okay. Really good examples as well. And just to call it out too, I mean, there are a lot of case studies. I was able to download quite a few right from the IMO website, but, always helps to dive into certain examples. Really, really interesting stuff. When we're talking about things like, if you're potentially, pitching a new client, or there's a new customer that has an interest in using this type of thing, not only to standardize and make better use of the data that they have in their EMR systems, but also they have particular questions in mind, like you mentioned with peri-op surgical procedures and potential cost reductions or reducing risk to patients and that sort of thing. These types of questions get at almost I don't want to say a consulting role, but I mean, on the one hand, you're providing the solution for the value set, and on the other hand, there's almost there's an opportunity to answer a particular question directly for that client. Is that in any way kind of part of the service or part of the vision at IMO, not just only providing the value set, the enhancing the analytics capabilities in the data sets themselves, but also providing almost like a consultative type of process for new customers?
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly not a services company. We're not out there marketing and selling services, but as part of our partnering with our customers and our EHR partners, we spend a lot of time doing that. And I think the success of that is because of our strong clinical employee base. It's often clinicians talking to clinicians. So we have an entire team of client-facing clinicians that really help implement, help make sure the client's up and running, help make sure we're solving that specific pain point and identifying if there are other pain points we can solve in the process. So I think our success really is because it's not just sending employees out to work with them, but it's sending clinicians out who speak their language.
Speaking of clinicians working at IMO, I think on the leadership team, there are a few clinicians. Of course, the super important to bring that perspective into it. And I think at the same time, as you're developing the value sets themselves, I imagine you probably need a clinical perspective, a clinical team to help to validate the codes themselves. And that's also part of the development process of updating the value sets. There's a big clinical team at IMO.
We have a large clinical and linguistics team that works on what we call our knowledge team or our content curation. So content curation coupled with software engineering is kind of how our product comes to fruition. So those clinicians are working there right side by side with software engineering and developing the content, keeping the content up to date, making sure the content is accurate as to how it's linking to other terminologies. And to the code sets. So that's all clinically driven.
Really interesting stuff. It's we started off kind of mentioning that this is like, it's not the new kind of shiny object in the room, so to speak. It's not like the sexy cool new biologic drug coming out on the market, or like some super duper app that's capable of doing everything. But again, at the same time, it's the foundation of so many of how these apps actually work. A little bit of irony in there as well. And again, it's so widespread. It's used by so many hospital systems and providers themselves. And we've touched on EMR vendors or EMR systems a couple times. As I understand it, I know that there are EMR companies. There are a few dozen EMR companies. Some of them, I think, also have their own value sets. I think, and I'm wondering, how does IMO? How do you have partnerships with an EMR vendor if they have their own value sets? Is that do you have to work with them to kind of further develop, to provide them directly with your own value set?
So we don't compete at all with our EHR partners. We have a long, rich history of sort of being integrated into our EHR partners and working side by side with them. And so many of them have value set tools, but not the actual content that sits behind it. So I think of the EHR as much more of a systematic tool, and we're sort of the meat that sort of feeds the tool, or the content that feeds the tool. And we have a really good partnership that way. So we have a customer advisory council that really covers sort of a wide swath of different EHR vendor users, different types of businesses, different types of hospitals and sizes. And we actually get lots of our product ideas directly from that group. And when we do, we sit down as we develop our product roadmap with our EHR partners to make sure there's not a lot of conflict and that it's a win-win. And it's worked really, really well for us.
I wanted to also go back to this example of being able to use the data to actually put together disease cohorts. And you mentioned the example of pharma companies, for example, being able to identify a lot more patients, significantly more patients by using these particular value sets. Touching on this idea of the insights that can be drawn out of data, so not just having the data itself, but transforming it into something useful. Is there an opportunity now to sort of standardize the certain disease cohorts? I'm wondering in terms of, so for example, if I was another company and I wanted to use data set from a claims data vendor, but I need to know how to identify certain patient populations to be able to study that. I'm wondering how does the partnership kind of work in that case? Would this company be able to kind of, license, let's say, the value set from IMO, apply it to a third-party vendor that actually has the data, and then pull together this huge cohort that's a lot more precise than it would be otherwise?
Yeah, we come to sort of the end user in a variety of ways. Sometimes we're selling directly to the company they work for, the hospital, the company they work for. Sometimes we show up embedded in a tool from somebody else. So there are many third-party vendors who will embed IMO as part of the process, and the end user gets access that way. We are open to always that we get to the end user, because our goal is really to make data better for healthcare. And so however it shows up is good with us, right? And I think your point that you've made a couple of times is so true. We're really foundational. We're really flying under the radar in many cases. And that's fine with us, as long as we're making a difference in healthcare data and how healthcare is working. We don't need to be the bright new shiny object. We just want to make sure we're foundational. And I think the nice thing about the COVID year, if there's any nice thing about a horrible year like that, it's that it really did put the exclamation point on IMO being foundational in the industry and how critical we were at every juncture of sort of the learning, because it was really an evolution, right? This pandemic wasn't just tragic, but it was an evolution of learning. And we were right there working side by side with both the provider community and the CDC every step of the way. And that leads us into vaccinations as well, right? I think we are foundational, and we don't need to be out in front. Mm-hmm. The shiny object.
The shiny object in front. Although again, in my eyes, like I have shiny objects in my eyes right now looking at this thing, because again, I know the value coming from this the data science background. We've talked a little bit about some of the companies and partners that can really make use of the value sets at IMO, and of course, within the company itself, there are a lot of clinicians that are helping to build up these and validate these data sets. I wonder. And one of the things that I found really interesting is that, again, there are a couple clinicians within the leadership team. I wonder if we can get a little bit of their perspective sort of indirectly. What are clinicians saying about the services at IMO? I don't know if you have a chance to speak with them directly, but since we started off saying that, yes, there is going to be an impact in a practical way for clinicians, because they're not, they can actually make better use of these codes in their everyday roles. I imagine that there's probably a lot of positive feedback from them as well.
Yeah, it's interesting, because a lot of people ask us, how does a software company get all of these clinical employees? Like, how does that happen, right? These are trained physicians and trained RNs, and like, how's that happening? And the reason is because they recognize the value this provides, and they want to be a part of it. And they also understand very clearly that you can't do this without a clinical background. There are pieces of this puzzle you just cannot do without a clinical background or do it right. And so they're very passionate about the product. They're passionate as they're building it. We've got clinicians, as I told you, on the front end building it. We've got clinicians out talking to other clinicians about it. We've got clinicians on our leadership team who are out speaking to the world about data quality and why this matters and why it's so important. And so I think it really hits them in so many different ways that they get really excited about the individual impact they see and the overall market impact that they see, that we continue to hire more and more clinicians, which is really nice. And they stay with us. They like to be part of the solution. And it's our ability to attract and retain those type of employees that really make us relevant, right? That's what makes us special. That's what makes us different. That's what makes this so hard, right? It's why a hospital can't just go create all this on their own. They could, but they have to take clinicians off what they're doing and really focus here. And we have the benefit of having these smart, experienced clinicians who are working on this every day and also staying really relevant.
There really aren't that many people who have a combination of a strong clinical background and an informatics tech background. Those are very niche skill sets, and combining them together is even more niche. So I would say props to being able to recruit, I guess, folks actually with a clinical background to come in and develop the products at IMO. We'll definitely touch quite a bit more on the recruitment kind of approach at IMO, including the diversity aspect of the recruitment approach at IMO. There's one other piece that we've touched on a couple times now, which is this technical and clinical combination. You have a long history. You've worked in tech and you're currently in healthcare as well, maybe at the interface of healthcare and tech, health IT, I guess we can call it. And I wonder if I can get kind of your high level perspective on the industry. I know it's a broad question, but health IT has become even more important, especially through 2020. There's so many more companies and so much more activity happening. Everything is moving towards digitalized services. All the more reason to think about and to incorporate ideas of, data privacy, security, standardized information, high quality information, and that sort of thing. What sort of trends are you seeing in the industry as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are the questions. My career path, as you suggest, I spent the last 15 years in healthcare, but prior to that, I was in a lot of different industries. And I actually accidentally happened into healthcare through a series of coincidences and landed here and was like, wow, this is the place to be where you can really make a difference. And I don't regret all of that other experience, because I think this sort of digital evolution inside of healthcare, this data focus inside of healthcare happened in other industries earlier. So I got a chance to be a part of that in other industries in other ways. And now to see healthcare sort of coming alive with that at such a critical time, it's really exciting to be able to bring some of that past experience and sort of where the potholes are in that journey and what to kind of expect is different. Of course, the application in healthcare is really different because now you've got it in a clinical setting. But look, this is what we need to be happening right now. And I think the industry has woken up in a big way to being able to let physicians get back to taking care of patients. That's critical. It's critical from a patient perspective, and it's critical from a physician perspective. Focusing on outcomes is becoming really, really, really the focus. You see more physician groups taking risk. You see different models evolving. Those have been out there for a while, but I think we'll see those evolve much quicker now, because I think that those are all dependent on good data. Right? You can't actually take risk if you don't have the knowledge of the right data and the information there. So data as this center point inside of healthcare, as sort of a offshoot of this digital evolution, is front and center right now. And I think if anything happened over the last 12 to 15 months, it's this emphasis on data and data quality and data specificity. And so I think there's no more having to sell that concept to the industry. Everybody understands that. Now it's a race to say, how do we get those tools to do that in the hands of all of the right people so that they can get accurate and up-to-date information, whether that be a physician who's rounding and walks in to see a patient and says, I don't need to see a 400-page chart. I need this very, very specific summary for the purpose that I'm here, right? So I can spend the right time and get to the right information. I don't want to have to weed through that information, or to somebody as big as a data aggregator who's trying to help identify cohorts. So it spans really a pretty large spectrum, but I think it's an incredibly exciting time to be in healthcare. I think I think the evolution now will speed up. I think we're going to see it speed up pretty dramatically here, and I'm thrilled to have IMO be a part of it.
Really good to hear. There was a really interesting point that you made here. It's almost there's almost like two ends of the spectrum here, in the sense that yes, there's a lot to be done in healthcare, especially from a health IT perspective. But the only way to move fast is if we actually standardize the information, so that everyone's talking about the same thing and actually being able to make use of that information as much as possible. And so, yes, you do want to move fast, but typically that progress has been slowed by the need for standardization, keeping things private and secure, and that sort of thing. So if there's an opportunity to kind of, speed up that progress in a standardized way, And it seems like one of the big solutions to that is actually being offered by IMO. So that's one of the reasons why I find this conversation and IMO as a company really interesting and exciting. That's a real opportunity, I think, to accelerate towards things that we actually need.
Absolutely. And the other thing I'd add is being able to get at the information when you need it, how you need it, right? So one of the other challenges is there's all this information. You don't need all of it all of the time. So you need the very specific information organized for you the way you need it when you need it. And that's really critical right now.
On that point, not the best segue, I know, but I really wanted to touch on IMO's company culture too. Yeah. And the reason why is because I think one of the very obvious things that popped out to me as I was reading about the company, especially on the company website, is that the focus of IMO, or I should rephrase it, the impact of IMO is actually, I'm going to use the word realized, not only through its technology solutions, data solutions, value set solutions through all its partners, but also through its culture. And I think that's become especially obvious since you joined the company, and I wanted to focus on that a little bit. And the part that I wanted to start with is there's a really cool article. I don't think it was published too long ago, maybe 2020, about a year ago. It's the idea, and I think it started with a homework assignment that your son had, and basically the assignment was, okay, come up with one word that sort of describes how you're going to work over the next year. And so you took that lesson, you applied it to IMO as a company, and the word that you came up with for you to focus on is the word intentional. And I wanted to get your perspective to start off here. Why is this really important to the company culture?
So let me back up a little bit on culture. I'm super passionate about it. And look, I think a company is only as good as their culture and their people, right? That's what companies are. And I've had a philosophy for a very long time that we hire really smart people and we don't always get them working at the top of their license. Just so happens now I have clinical people, so I can really say that. But working at their top capacity, we hire really smart people and sometimes have them doing really rote things. And so we've had a philosophy that says, how do we free people up to be their authentic selves at work? Just show up and be who you are, and use your full brain, right? Like, how do we make that who we are? Because if that happens, people will thrive and people will do amazing work. And so as we were struggling with this concept of how do we keep saying we want people to show up as their authentic selves, but how do we foster that? And I picked my son up after school, and he said he was writing a paper that his teacher had asked him to think of one word for the year, no New Year's resolutions, but one word that mattered to his whole self, that mattered to his whole life, that mattered in sports and academics and his schoolwork, his family, which as I listened to him, I was like, wow, that sounds easy, but it's not that easy, right? It's easy to come up with sort of buzzwords, but when you think about impacting your whole life, how do you do that? And so I started reading about this. I got really jazzed up about it. And I picked my word, which is intentional, which I'll talk about in a second. But I went to my ELT, my executive leadership team, and I said, let's do this. Let's make this part of the culture, because you learn a lot about somebody, and now I don't have to probe you and ask you 20 questions about your life. I can just say, what's your word, and tell me the story. Why is that impactful? And I can connect with you and reconnect with you on that word and why it matters. And so I picked intentional. And the reason I picked intentional was because I felt like I had just come out of a really reactive year, like the company had just come out of a really reactive year, reacting to the pandemic. And that now it was time in life in general to be intentional. Intentional about what we were going to focus on, intentional about fostering our culture, intentional about making a difference with our products in healthcare. And for me, intentional with my family time, intentional with my time with my husband, intentional with my time with my friends. I just felt like I can either let things happen to me or I can make things happen. And the way to make things happen is to be intentional. And so that's the word I keep in front of me all year. I have a cup that says intentional on it. We talk about it as a team. So after the executive leadership team each went through this exercise, we had an all company meeting and we shared this project with the company. And each one of us shared our story to be a little bit vulnerable and talk about how we came up with our word. And then I asked everybody in the company to go out and come up with their own word and to talk in their teams about what this word means. And we as an executive team have fireside chats, Zoom sessions with 10 or 11 employees. And it's become this incredible way to connect with employees, because all we have to say is like, tell me about your word and tell me what that means. And I have people messaging me on Teams all the time about their word and the impact it has had. And unlike a New Year's resolution where it's pass fail, right? And you give up, this is just a focus. This is just how I want to focus this year. So we're making this part of the culture because it really does emphasize the authenticity of just come as you are, be who you are. And we want you to be healthy and happy in your whole life. And we want to know the whole year. And it's really had an amazing impact on the company. And I hope this stays as a thread of our culture long term.
The intentional part of it was also, it's a company-wide ideal, right? So this is in addition to everyone's unique sort of one word, if you will,
Yep.
they're also thinking about the importance of being intentional in the work that they're doing.
Yes.
And then also the meaning of that work, I think, to themselves as well. It touches on a point that I think resonated very much with me, which is if you're going to hire very smart people and within IMO, so we're talking about people with clinical backgrounds, highly trained, and on top of that, you're layering in technology. So very capable folks. You want to give them a platform to be able to exercise all of their talents and skills and knowledge. So being intentional about that I think is extremely important. Really resonated with me when you mentioned that.
And we're actually measuring that now. And as part of our ENPS survey, we've added a question that says, do you feel like you're working at the top of your license? Right? Like, I want to know that we're moving that needle. I want to know that people come to work and use their whole brains. And if they're not, why aren't they? Like, what can we do to free that up? Because we have amazing people here. I don't want them to just sort of check a box and get through sort of whatever they need to get through for the day.
Makes sense. That's I wish everybody adopted that sort of thinking, but work in progress for everyone. Okay, so another really interesting point along these lines is so through 2020, IMO also launched several initiatives. They're described on various articles on the company website. So this includes, small group discussions. You'd mentioned those. Ideas. I don't remember what the acronym stands for. Literally ideas. I think they're essentially dialogue platforms, as well as setting up 2 new company holidays, so Juneteenth and Martin Luther King Day as well. It seems to me that a lot of that is about just being able to have open dialogue about certain issues that are affecting people within the company and outside the company, and sometimes it spills over to work as well, work life as well. I wonder if we can talk about that a little bit. So diversity within the company culture as one of the pillars for the company culture overall. How do you enable that on the one hand, but also kind of make sure that it doesn't turn into something that gets overly political? Obviously, everyone has their own views, but just kind of maintain it as like an open dialogue, but not, enabling potential conflict.
Yeah. So it's tough, right? So first of all, on the diversity front, I just believe in any organization, a diverse group of people sitting around any table at any level of the company are going to make better decisions. Right? Diversity of thought, diversity of race, diversity of gender, all kinds of perspectives, you just get better decisions and better outcomes. So it's a firm belief of mine, and we work on that at every level of the company. So that's really, really critical. And I think we sit in a really interesting place in healthcare IT because healthcare is highly populated at the employee level with females, but at the leadership level, less than 20%. Which I think is really tragic, right? Because women are making healthcare decisions. Women often are right in the middle of the healthcare decisions in their family. So why aren't we having more women-led organizations? That's a big question mark for me. So number one, the technology side has always been tough for women and minorities. And so what can we do to impact not only that in our company, but to impact more and more young youth, diverse people going into the STEM functions, working on bringing them into the company for internships at an earlier stage. So I think that's very intentional, right? I don't think that happens because you talk about it as a concept. We've made it a company goal, and we're very, very focused on making sure we have diverse candidate pools before we're making hiring decisions, right? It starts with a diverse candidate pool. If that's not diverse, then it's likely you're not going to get diverse hires. So we're very, very focused, and we have measurements associated at all different levels. On the inclusion side, we're also focused. So as I talked about how we measure our employee satisfaction, we break that down by gender and we break that down by race, because I want to know that everybody feels the same. Not that at the mass level, people are feeling really good about working here, but why are there differences and what can we do to impact that? So diversity and inclusion is really important. At the company, a grassroots program developed, which is a culture club, a group of employees that are focused on the culture. And a subset of that was our ideas group, which is the group that's focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the grassroots piece has been really, really positive. So I think it's a combination of top-down grassroots that kind of helps you meet in the middle and move the culture. We're not trying to solve world hunger. We're trying to move the needle for 300 people, right? We're trying to help us all evolve. And that means having discussions. And so when you couple that with what I was talking about being authentic earlier, the pandemic year was a tough year. Look, we had racial violence, we had mass shootings, we had all kinds of, families affected by the pandemic. And so I decided that I needed to stop focusing on being politically correct and showing up as my authentic self. And that by no means everyone needs to agree with my point of view, but I needed to be willing to share that. And I needed to be willing to share how the racial tensions and racial violence was impacting me as an individual, how turning on the news was impacting me as an individual, how just to start talking like a real person, and to let those dialogues happen, which doesn't mean we're all going to be on the same page. It just means we got to start having those conversations. So I did. I wrote to the whole company about the racial violence. I wrote, regardless of what your political beliefs are, I don't care. But the fact that we have a female vice president for the first time is a big deal. It's a big movement forward. And this is how that impacted me. So I just took the risk to be more vulnerable and talk to employees and encourage people to have those conversations, because I think we all learn from each other. We're all products of our life experience, our childhoods, where we grow up. We landed here with a set of perceptions and beliefs, which some are right and some are wrong, maybe, but it doesn't matter. Let's just talk about them, because maybe as a group we can evolve together. And that's really been our focus.
Again, I'm sensing a lot of interest and value and kind of push toward the focus on diversity, and I guess almost like a recognition also that it's you're an employee, sure, at whatever level, but you're a person first, a human first, and all of these issues affect everybody. Whether we talk about it or not, but we might as well talk about it, because that has some therapeutic value. At the very least, to be able to recognize it from the leadership, kind of the top down, that becomes a very important thing as well. It almost, if nothing else, it's at least reassuring that yes, it's on people's minds. Yes, people are thinking about it. And by talking about it, maybe there's something that we can actually do that'll come to surface, and maybe there's something even small that we can do. There's a social impact component here that I found really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes it's just that it's impacting all of us differently, but it's impacting us, right? And so that's okay. Like, let's talk about it. If I feel cruddy right now because of that, let's talk about it. And I think, as we moved people to work from home, as we went through this pandemic year, the blur between personal and professional, that line got really blurred for everybody. You got kids at home that are going to school while you're trying to do Zoom meetings, right? And what I wanted to relieve was this pressure that people felt like, oh, work call, put on my work self, put on my work face, be my work person. Now go be, that's really hard, right? What if we just are ourselves? And now I'm in a work meeting, and now I'm helping my kid with their homework, and now I'm watching the news that's upsetting. Like let's just be us. Because I think if we're us, we can all be a lot more impactful in the world. And I think there's a freedom in that.
So, and you've also mentioned an important kind of number statistic here, but I think it's very well known. So of course, the healthcare workforce, very broadly speaking here, is actually made up of the vast majority are women working, and a lot of decisions are actually made by women. But if you look at the senior leadership teams of a lot of companies, hospitals, health tech companies, and so on, somewhere in the ballpark of like only 5 to 10 are actually women in those senior leadership roles. A bit of a paradox, and obviously something that has gotten a lot more attention over the last few years, but there's still a lot more kind of work to do. One thing that really jumped to mind when I was again reading up on IMO is that I think it was at last year's JP Morgan conference. So you got quite a bit of attention for bringing an all-female team. I would also say, props for, first of all, promoting and hiring an all-female team. So you had a female team to actually bring to the conference to begin with. But at the same time, so you showed up. And by the way, for anyone, if you take a look at pictures from the JP Morgan conference, you look at the audience, it's not exactly a very diverse audience. So I'm sure that team would really stand out. What was the intent there? And, did anything sort of happen after the fact? And do you predict, maybe more women will actually go to the next conference?
It really stemmed from a few years prior to that. Someone had made a comment at JP Morgan that there were more Michaels presenting at the JP Morgan conference than women actually attending the conference, which is probably true and tragic, right? And so I have a diverse team of people. I didn't look around and say, let's just take women. I took smart, great leaders that were the best people to represent it, and it happened to be women. I enjoyed that it was women just because of the statements that have been made about JP Morgan. What I didn't expect, we had so many meetings every day. We were running from meeting to meeting. And the number of times people called us the girl gang when we walked in was really eye-opening to me, because A, they're noticing, but B, who would say to a group of men that a guy gang just walked in? Like, just people don't talk like that. And I was like, well, this is really interesting. It's really catching people off guard. And I'm glad we did it. Getting back to the intentional thing, which was not my word yet, but if you're intentional about these things, it really does have an impact. People did notice. We never said a thing. We just walked in and said, hi, let us introduce ourselves. And we had an amazing conference, and it started a buzz. So I did write a blog about it afterwards. But I think, as we think about females in the workplace, we need to mentor females. We need to help females, but we also need to sponsor them, which are two different things. The sponsoring them are taking these really smart, successful females and putting them out in visible places so that they get the exposure, right? And I felt like it was a really good opportunity to take some really incredible people and put them out in front of 13 meetings a day, across a lot for 3 or 4 days, and we made an impact. I hope that continues to be sort of a ripple effect in the water. I will continue to be very focused and intentional about that, because I think the more that other women in the workforce see that, the more it's a possibility. I will say this, I think progress was being made and not quick enough. And I think the pandemic, if you look at the stats, has taken us backwards in a really scary way. So women were far more impacted and far more likely to leave their careers during the pandemic because of homeschooling and life situations. And we lost some amazing women out of the workforce in droves. And I do believe it's our responsibility now to put some programs together to entice these women back in a way that makes sense for them. And so we're working on what people are calling returnships to get these women to return to the workforce. We're working on a program here at IMO because I think we all owe it to these bright, smart women to not take 2 steps backwards and have them all leave, but help them back into the workforce in a way that makes sense and get their brains back working with us. And I think this isn't that men can't lead. They do a great job, but I think women bring a different perspective. And so there should be a mix. There just has to be a mix out there, and we're not there yet.
It's interesting. One last point on this, because I know we have to wrap up really soon. I was just having a conversation with a woman founder. She'd actually co-founded a few companies, tech companies. She has a computer science background. She's a software developer, and she was looking to hire female employees to try to even out their employee base. And one of the comments was, it's actually hard to find women that have both the technical and the clinical sort of understanding. So maybe it's a combination of helping or encouraging more women to actually go into STEM. Life sciences are, I think, a little more balanced, but when we're talking about things like computer science, software engineering, that sort of thing, not as evenly set. And at the same time, also helping to mentor and promote women who are already in these roles to try to seek leadership, senior leadership roles. The combination of those two, I think, will go a long way. But yeah, there's definitely still quite a bit of progress to be made.
Talk a lot about that. I mean, I think when I talk about diverse candidate pools, does it take longer to get a diverse candidate pool? It does. You have to be a lot more focused. But is it possible? It absolutely is. And so I think if we just slow down and get more focused, we can do it. That's not to negate what you said. We absolutely need to encourage people of color and women to go into the STEM field, because we're missing out. we're just missing out on the opportunity to have them be a part of that.
Being very intentional about that approach is extremely important, of course.
Right.
And one last question here, and then we'll wrap up. I'm wondering, if we look forward now over the next couple of years, coming out of the pandemic, of course, what do you look forward to the most?
For me personally, I look forward to being back together with people. I'm Zoom exhausted. So I just can't wait for the energy and the innovation. Although we got a lot more productive during the pandemic than we did with everybody working at home, heads down, really focused. Productivity's up, innovation isn't up, right? Those hallway side conversations. So I'm super excited about that coming back to fruition and sort of moving us forward again across the board. And then just now that I feel like the lights went on about this data quality issue. I feel like someone just flipped all the lights on. And so now it's like, let's go make it happen. And I'm really excited that we're sort of out of the phase of how do we turn the lights on and into the phase of let's go do something about it.
Great insights. This has been an awesome conversation, and I wish we could continue this for a couple more hours. Lots of really interesting topics to dive into. But you know what? I'm always open to having a follow-up conversation in a few weeks, a year or so, as the company grows. Lots more partners come on board, and lots more development in its product suites. So I see a lot of awesome things happening at IMO. Would love to have you come back on, but at least for today, it's been an awesome talk. Learned a lot from you, so I definitely appreciate you coming on the show today. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.